Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Is that on? Can't tell. Welcome to the final session of the Student Ethics Symposium, Living Our Ideals. And this session is on our civic engagement projects. Those of you in my ethics and values classes know that this semester I've been focusing on that question of how to live well together in society. And we've been working on those issues that sometimes make it hard to live together in society, like poverty and prejudice, violence and environmental issues. So my Ethics Bowl team as well has been working on these issues. We call them in civic engagement projects, where we're trying to, as you know, those of you in my classes, we're trying to kind of identify the facts that inform these issues of poverty, prejudice, violence, and environmental destruction. What are the facts? What are some causes of these issues? And what are some possible solutions or responses to these issues? And what philosophers and organizations are working on these issues that we could perhaps contact and create a network of people trying to work together to solve these problems in a holistic kind of a way. So this final session is where my Ethics Bowl team will be presenting some of their thoughts on these topics. I've got two persons per group, so I don't know, who's the poverty group? Oh, poverty, and then you are environmental issues. Over here we have violence and prejudice. So maybe we'll start over here if that's okay. So just Jesse, I know you want to have more time to talk. You were shortchanged before. We'll have you, first off, let's have you all introduce yourself, and then we'll come back and we'll start with our poverty group. And they will each have like 10 minutes to present their ideas, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end to ask questions. But we have to end right at 10:02 because I have another class I have to run to, so we'll have to end on time. So go ahead, Jesse.
It's funny because I actually asked to be last, so now we're going first. Yeah, yes. Anyway, I'm Jesse. I'm a philosophy major.
I'm Andrew. I study philosophy and theater.
I'm Allie. I'm a pre-med student.
I'm Calvin. I'm a philosophy student.
I'm Tisha. I am a double major of political science and psychology.
My name is Calvin as well, and I'm a philosophy major too.
My name is Ella, and I'm a philosophy major, music minor.
And I'm Sabrina, and I'm a biology major.
I think it'll get both of us there. So the first thing that we're going to go over is discussing just a couple of key statistics to kind of contextualize the situation. There's 340 million people in the United States. Of those, 100 million receive government assistance with food, housing, or healthcare. So that's about close to 1/3 of the population of this country. And 36.8 million of those are below the poverty line.
49% of American adults have $500 or less in their savings account. And also just talking about poverty, most of the solutions that we find are oriented towards hiding the symptoms rather than treating the systemic issue.
So going along with the Ethics Bowl team activity you saw earlier, we first want to consider stakeholders that are involved in this. So we've divided these into those cared for and those who are caring for or ought to be caring for. Those cared for include any group that is marginalized or in need. This includes the homeless, the impoverished, people who are prevented from social mobility in any way, particularly minorities and immigrants or those with mental illness. All of these tend to suffer the effects of poverty, disproportionate numbers.
Those caring for are those with the means to help others, with access to the resources necessary to help others. So we put that as those with the means, and government and nonprofit or charity organizations.
And so the main problem that's sort of driving poverty, or that we want to solve, insofar as you can solve poverty, I suppose, is that there are people that don't have the means to support themselves. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. That's bad. We don't like that. Not good.
Some of the main causes we saw and the problems and conflicts that we see are unequal distribution of resources, greed, the desire for control, and ignorance.
So when we went to look at things that could address some of these causes that are driving this problem, the primary thing that we wanted to emphasize is the importance of listening to people about what their needs are. There tends to be this sort of predominant tendency to see those who don't have enough as perhaps not able to know what they need or not worthy of deciding what they need for themselves. And so there's this like assumption that those who have the resources ought to decide how those resources are allocated when they want to give them. And so we want to emphasize that it's important to listen to the people in need as far as what they want.
Because it really is the people in the situations that know what would be of most benefit to them. One of the other things we wanted to do was change the undesirable narrative and see all people as equal members of the community who are prioritized by both citizens and government. We understand that there's often times where there's people that we can't necessarily let into our homes, so we decided to say friends with boundaries. You know, there are certain like situations in which it would be dangerous, but to understand that people living in poverty or homelessness or anything like that are part of our community, and they do they add to the benefit of our lives and whatnot.
So as far as what individuals can do or what we hope to drive is that there's a particularly individualistic streak in America of a sense of I take care of me and my own. And we think it's really important to reemphasize the importance of taking care of everybody in a community together, and that one's personal responsibility extends beyond just those who are immediately in one's life. And then, emphasizing like giving stuff. And I don't mean like objects. Sometimes objects may be money, sometimes time, sometimes your skills. There's all sorts of things that can be utilized in order to help those who are lacking.
As well as a better distribution of the resources. So next we're going to name a few philosophers or scholars who work on this topic who could be researched for more info. One of them that I really liked is Richard Jeffries. He's like an American writer / philosopher. He talks about the unequal distribution of resources. And then
another philosopher who's pertinent on this issue would be G.K. Chesterton, who is where we drew a lot of this idea of not condescending to those in need, but rather listening to them and treating them as equal members of the society who have just as much of a say in what they need and what the resources should be doing. So he's a good resource. As far as organizations who are working on this issue already that are available to help with or interact with, the Food and Care Coalition, and I think they're based in Provo. They do all sorts of things. They give out food, they provide meals, and they take everything. They will take people that can play the guitar to go around and entertain people while they're eating. They will take food, they will take money, all sorts of stuff. Catholic Community Services provides legal services for immigrants, foster care, housing and a day shelter for those who are experiencing homelessness, as well as job training, and then baby supplies and parenting classes for those new parents who don't have the resources they need to start a family.
So then there's another organization called Soft White Underbelly. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this podcast. It's a video where he goes around and he talks to people in all sorts of different walks of life, women working the streets, people experiencing homelessness, people who had a child with their sibling, It's just basically anything that you could possibly think of. And he has rational conversations with them. And you can actually really see, these people don't think that far differently than we do, and it's a very personal way to A, understand another person, and B, see how similar you are to them, and the only reason that you're where you are and they're where they are is just due to circumstance. It's very important to understand that and break that barrier of they're completely different, because they're not. People are not that different from us. And then I just wanted to go back to our talking about a few philosophers, and I wanted to read to you some of what Richard Jeffries says about poverty. He says, "This our earth produces not only a sufficiency and a superabundance, but in 1 year pours a cornucopia of good things forth, enough to fill us for many years in succession. The only reason we do not enjoy it is the want of rational organization." Rational organization is kind of what we do. And I see that we've done this because you want to know that you're going to have enough food for the winter. Rational organization is making sure that people are making money. It's making sure that we know what quantity. And Richard Jeffries kind of suggests maybe a move away from the want of control of resources and maybe moving towards the understanding. And I mean, you can even put this maybe into like land ethics, working with the land instead of against it and trying to control it, and being able to distribute resources properly without greed and without the want of money.
That's poverty.
There you go.
All right, so I'm Allie and this is Calvin, and our project is focused on climate change. So I'm sure a lot of people know, but there are both human-caused and natural causes of climate change. But the number one cause of climate change is rising temperatures, primarily due to the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, specifically CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. So the main cause of greenhouse gas emissions is from industry like coal mining and other things, but then transportation and agriculture and other causes also significantly add to climate change. So for our project, we wanted to focus on agriculture and specifically animal agriculture. And then for Utah specifically, we wanted to talk about water use as well. And Calvin will talk about water use a little bit more. So for water use specifically, water exacerbates the strain on natural resources and increases energy demand that's needed for water extraction, treatment, and distribution. So more energy is required to pump, treat, and transport the water, leading to higher greenhouse gas emissions. And specifically in states like Utah, California, and Texas, where there's more of a desert climate, energy-intensive agriculture leads to irrigation cycles that not only cause more water use, but lead to more fuel use needed for the pumps, for the tractors, and release of certain fertilizers that degrade the soil. And so specifically, we live in Utah, which has a desert climate, and so we waste a lot of water, and Calvin will talk a little bit more about that. But specifically for animal agriculture and greenhouse gas emissions, 44% of greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture are methane, which is produced through, it's called enteric fermentation, which you guys have probably heard about, is like cows burping, which gives off methane. And methane is actually 25 to 28 times more potent than CO2 over a 100-year period in terms of greenhouse gas effect. So CO2 is the number one cause of greenhouse gas emissions, but methane is more potent. And 17% of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture are from nitrous oxide, which is released from both animal manure and fertilizer used to grow feed crops. And nitrous oxide is many more times, I don't know the exact number, more effective than CO2 at trapping heat in the atmosphere over a 100-year period. And then 39% is from CO2, as we already talked about, which are also known as fossil fuels. And for animal agriculture, that can be caused by the transportation of animal products and energy from farm operations, just any operations that release carbon dioxide. And animal agriculture is also a major cause of deforestation, specifically in places like Brazil, where there is the majority of soybean and corn production is used primarily for livestock, and that reduces the availability so deforestation reduces the ability to absorb amounts of carbon that is stored in trees and soil. So if the trees and soil can't store it, then it's released into the atmosphere. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So that's kind of an overview of climate change in general. And then for our project specifically, we're focusing on Utah and water use, as I said a little bit before. So Calvin will talk a little bit more about the water use.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie. So at the beginning of the semester, when we were kind of getting introduced to these projects by Jeff, taking on the environmental/climate change topic is a little bit overwhelming because this is like a mass. I mean, they're all really big topics, right? And so we wanted to focus a little bit more, since this is a civics engagement project, on a niche that we thought we could focus on a more local level. And Ali talked a lot about how it kind of a really broad problem that's contributing to climate change is animal agriculture generally. And we ended up doing a lot of research, like she was saying, into water rights as far as Utah goes. And there's a really interesting connection between those two things, because it turns out that 70%, well, 68% of all of Utah's water diversions actually go towards alfalfa and other hay-related crops. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm not using a lot of alfalfa or other hay crops in my day-to-day life. And so it's pretty clear that most of those crops, if not all of those crops, are going directly towards animal agriculture. And just to be clear, it takes 450,000 gallons of water to produce a ton of alfalfa, and that's about the same amount that 2 Utah homes are going to use in a year. And a ton of alfalfa does not feed very many cows. I don't remember the exact number, but it's like I think 1 or 2 cows. And so this is kind of a like an interesting dilemma that we find ourselves in, where not only is animal agriculture itself contributing enormously to the problem of climate change, but also the resources that we're allocating to supply and support animal agriculture, they are draining other natural resources. And so the more we kind of dove into this, the more it became extremely evident that this process that we're kind of relying, or that we tell ourselves we rely on to feed ourselves and to just to obtain nourishment, are extremely damaging, not only to the planet at a large scale level, but also to our local environmental systems. And so we were kind of talking about, what are things we can do here, and Ali is going to talk more about this in a second, but a big thing we were focusing on is also just the rights of animals involved in animal agriculture, because regardless of your stance on whether or not it's ethically or morally acceptable to eat another living being, it does seem extremely problematic to farm life in the way that we do. And it is that mass production of animal products that is not only problematic in itself, but is contributing to the environmental degradation and is taxing our water resources. So it's kind of this like triple whammy of like really terrible things that we're examining at a local level. And so in order to then address that at what we saw as a somewhat more local level, Ali's going to talk about a project that she's been thinking about for a really long time, and that we're kind of spearheading here.
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. So first, just to add on to that, there's a study done by the Stanford School of Sustainability that they say that they have this quote that says that phasing out animal agriculture represents our best and most immediate chance to reverse the trajectory of climate change. And so they talk about like a plant-based diet in that study and things. So for Utah specifically, something that I've been wanting to do for a long time is I've looked at the LDS Church, because the LDS Church has significant impact on Utah legislature. And in LDS Church doctrine, there are past prophets and things that talk about animals and how we should treat animals with kindness, and how we should be kind to them. And then they also view animals as like they have spirits and they'll go to heaven and things. So for my project, I wanted to write a letter to the LDS Church that talks about a little bit of the past doctrine, but a lot of it just kind of reminding the church of values that they already hold, like compassion and certain things like that I think are compatible with caring about animals. And so I think for like the climate change issue, I think in order to take the issue seriously with animal agriculture, we need to stop viewing animals as property, but as conscious beings that deserve the autonomy to live out their own lives without being exploited for human gain and solely. So yeah, that's mostly our project. So I'm working on a letter right now to write to the LDS Church, and I'm just looking for them to have a conversation with me about it. So if anyone is interested in like being a part of that or want to sign the letter or anything, then you can contact Jeff or talk to me after about it, and that would be awesome. So that's mainly our project. Do you have anything else to say? All right, thank you.
Hi. Just a reminder, I'm Tisha and this is Calvin. When our group was first discussing violence, we decided we needed to narrow it down because it is such a broad, complex topic within America. So we chose to take the path of where we feel violence really starts, which is in the home with domestic violence and weapons violence, specifically gun violence. Just to get that started, I'd like to share some statistics with you. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will have experienced severe violence from an intimate partner. 1 in 4 children will have witnessed domestic abuse. 1 in 10 high school students have experienced physical violence in a romantic partner. And these statistics raise significantly when you're talking about the LGBT community, where 54% of those who identify as transgender or non-binary have experienced domestic violence. 25.5% of gay men and 40% of lesbian women will experience domestic violence. 61% of bisexual women and 37.3% of bisexual men have also reported the same. We feel that this is a huge issue because there's a lot of stigma surrounding it, especially when male victims are involved. And our plan to help remedy this is education-based and informing people what they can do and how they can help, because domestic violence is a system where love is used as a weapon to isolate people from those who care about them the most and those who could help them in these situations. So I will pass to Calvin.
Yeah, so I was researching more about percentages of gun violence, and I found that 76 women are killed every month from an intimate partner with a gun. And that access to a weapon usually, increases the chance of violence in the home, right? Especially a homicide. And then, of course, 50% of all deaths that we see are from guns, right? And just last year alone, in 2024, there were recorded 83 incidents of school shootings, right? Where, the perpetrator usually gets the gun from the home or by another legal means, but, is obviously in no condition to have their own gun, right? And that's what I found for that. Okay.
To change topic a little bit, we also wanted to discuss some of the different types of violence. In a lot of my research, I found that the stereotype is that there's only 2 top types of domestic violence, being physical and sexual assault. And that's not the case. There's actually a wide variety of ways that people can be abused within the home. Just to go over some of those, emotional violence includes threats and humiliation and isolation. Then there's financial abuse, which is restricting and controlling a partner's access to money and finances and their finances in general. Then there's digital abuse, which is taking a partner's ability to communicate with the outside world via technology, and coercive control, which is patterns of intimidation, degradation, and isolation with the specific threat of physical or sexual violence. And encompassing all of these types of abuse is gaslighting. I know we've all heard that term, but I don't think we fully understand just how detrimental this can be to a person suffering abuse, because it makes them question not only their own perceptions of things, but how people outside the situation will perceive them. And it gives them a reason to stay, because if there's not really any abuse in their mind, there's no reason to leave. And I think if we begin to educate ourselves and those around us about how much of an issue this is in today's society, we can actually start to break down these walls that lead to victims staying in situations that are potentially deadly, as Calvin has shown. And as far as resources and people who are already working on this, there were 3 major ones that we found. The first 2 are within Utah. The Refuge has a bunch of different locations in Utah. Their biggest one is in Provo, and they always accept volunteer work and donations. The next one is the YWCA, who is based out of Salt Lake. They are primarily focused only in Utah. And they also accept donations of food, clothing, and volunteer time. The final one is an international organization where they do accept monetary donations, but a lot of their ask is to be spread through word of mouth. So they are called the Mankind Initiative, and they are unique in the fact that they specialize in helping male victims find help, as a lot of the resources that are available are catered only to women, and shelters can't take men because they have so many women that need to be kept safe. And I think that is all we have for you today.
I'm going to grab my notes real quick, and then I'll be ready. But yeah, hi. Thank you all for being here. Again, I'm Ella. This is Sabrina. And our project was on prejudice. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as soon as I find my notes.
All right. So for the first one, we identified some 5 current causes of prejudice in the U.S. We identified the first one being legislation that is currently targeting minority groups to make them smaller, and it's one of the causes of oppression. The second one is the loss of community and division and polarization of political groups. The third is the media and political demonization and scapegoating of minority groups. The fourth is the erasure of history and knowledge of past events, and the fifth being inaccessibility to education and experience with diversity. The stakeholders that we identified in this situation are those who care, the society and government, leaders, media, and organizations. And then those who are cared for are the most vulnerable, are the minority groups, including immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ plus members, disabled people, veterans, women, and pregnant people, et cetera. There are more that we didn't cover, but these are the main ones. And then the main issue that we identified is the lack of consideration and negative stigma against minority groups. Those who are caring have failed. There's not enough exposure, community, and education. And media needs to be more accurate with higher standards for truth about minority groups. And so some solutions that we came up with, our priorities are exposure, education, and community. Exposure would be providing minority groups with spaces to share art and stories about their experiences, and exposing people who are not part of minority groups to those stories. Education would be encouraging people to take higher education, increasing accessibility to higher education, more student support programs, cheaper tuition, et cetera. Required cultural education in K-12, that would look like, sending children on field trips and things like that to learn about different cultures other than their own so that they get those experiences at a young age. And then community would be encouraging civic discussion and debate, encouraging people to be more involved in local politics, plan events and community resources that allow people to be exposed to experiences outside their own, past that young age. And then some different philosophers that we found, if you want to talk about this one, sorry.
Yeah, I can go over these. So some different philosophers that we kind of were talking about as we were talking about kind of this like meta-analysis of like what actually causes prejudice. Sartre was one of the big ones. I mentioned this earlier during our ethics presentation I used other as a verb and said othering the other people. This is something that Jean-Paul Sartre brings up a lot. He's an existentialist philosopher, and in his book, Anti-Semite and Jew, and also in Bad Faith, he talks a little bit about how, again, as humans, we tend to have this fickle nature to really want to separate ourselves as individuals against someone else and to see them as something separate from us. This is problematic for a large number of reasons. One, just on the bare bones of things, it causes you to not have a connection that you otherwise would have had with a person by seeing them as something, as an object, as something to be evaluated, something to be determined solely based on what it is physically, right? Obviously, doing this leads to other problems of prejudice. Directly from this problem of seeing someone as an object, you see this sort of effect where now you can see them as a tool. You can see them as a mere means and not respect their individuality as a subject, a living person. In Anti-Semite and Jew, Sartre talks a lot about how we don't necessarily, the whole entire movement wasn't necessarily because we hated Jews, it was because they were just the other. In every situation with prejudice kind of spanning all across history, the actual determiner for why we oppress other groups isn't actually dependent on necessarily color of their skin or their religious background or their sexuality or their gender. None of those things actually matter. The truth of it is that we hate them because they're the other. because we see them as something other than ourselves. The oppressor just needs one specific qualification, one specific thing that they can latch onto and then demonize. It's not necessarily that the inherent nature of someone's being is a bad thing. It's just that we see it as a bad thing because we're othering them. So this is kind of where this problem has stemmed from. Sartre talks a lot about it. Frantz Fanon is also brilliant and wrote a novel called Black Skin, White Masks that further talks about this issue, kind of puts it in terms of kind of on this like second level. Now you're like othering this thing, and there's this character that back in like the I think it was during the 1920s, this character that now has like black skin but is white passing, and so is able to have all of this access to all of these different institutions and is able to kind of like party with the socialites. Meanwhile, all of these like awful, horrible racist jokes are being made around her, and she's just like, haha, yeah, and goes along with it. And so it kind of puts it into play in terms of, here's this awful thing where you've othered this person, and now they're having to pretend to play both identities in order to actually have access to all of their rights, and all of these basic things. The last philosopher that we thought of, and there are many, many more that we've considered ourselves with, but the last one is Simone de Beauvoir with The Second Sex, specifically talking about issues of sexism. So those are just a couple of the ones that we've mentioned so far. I'm sure that there's many others. But to continue on, I can go over some of the organizations actually. So some of the organizations that we've kind of looked into in regard to how to effectively alleviate systems of prejudice. I think that first and foremost, we really, really want to emphasize that the first step is really just to empathize with other people and to try and come across as raw and vulnerable. Try to associate yourself with other people, really see them as a subject living life, not necessarily as an object and something to be like qualified. So the organizations that also help do this are the NAACP, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. They have legal teams that do political lobbying and also help with publicity efforts and litigation strategies. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, is another one. They're an information site for different pressing issues and advocacy regarding prejudice. Also, Thrive International, they provide temporary housing for immigrants. Planned Parenthood does a lot of different things. They also do a lot of publicity efforts regarding like different access issues to abortions, different access issues to women who are planning to have pregnancies, different things like that. And then also Centers for Intercultural Engagement, both at UVU and at other universities. These intercultural engagement centers have recently become far and few between. A lot of them have simply changed their names in order to comply with different DEI laws. They still exist, you just have to find them. So those are just a couple of the organizations that we found. But first and foremost, I think that people and just connections is the main first step in combating prejudice.
And then just to go into some like sort of practical ways forward that we can get rid of prejudice, or at least get some first steps on finding solutions for this. I would like to do research on what methods are most effective at getting rid of negative stigma in people's minds. Finding some psychology to go along with the philosophers that have written about this. We could find ways to encourage students to volunteer with organizations that build community well-being, like the organizations that we found here. We could advocate for legislation and models, and contacting elected officials and encouraging students to sign petitions and attend government meetings. And then we can also, advocate for grassroots movements and raising awareness for issues. And that can be done in many different ways, putting flyers around the school, and also, just contacting organizations to maybe come and have a speaker come speak here to all the students here. And then we just want to reiterate that our main goal is definitely to encourage organizations and individuals to unite and go to legislations as a united front, because they'll be seen as stronger and have more of a chance at making an impact. And that is probably the most important thing. So that's our presentation.
Excellent. That'll give us some good time for some questions. I know a lot of you have been working on these projects in your classes, so hopefully you have some good ideas or thoughts. Maybe you can add some ideas to what's been presented here. So let's open it up. Any questions for any of the groups?
Hi, I wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for all of the information that you've provided today and all the work that I know that you've done throughout the semester. This is a question for any of you who would like to answer it. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to what you think is important about engaging in sort of civics and in these sorts of projects and what you feel you've gained from them as kind of like, why should we all maybe be engaging with problems that either are very relevant to us or are outside of us.
I'll go really quick, and then Ella, you can say something too if you want. For me, I see primarily like two objectives when you're engaging civically, so to speak. I think the primary impulse to try and make a difference, whether it's in your community or globally or whatnot, is to actually achieve some level of change, right? To impact things that you think need to be different, right? I think it's pretty obvious. It doesn't take much thought to look around and see what's going on, what's impacting you or others negatively, and I think it's a very natural and noble thing to have an impulse to want to change those. But the secondary purpose for these civic engagement projects that's impacted me is that, like from a psychological perspective, it's much easier to combat feelings of like personal helplessness when you're looking at whatever state of affairs you're existing in, right? Like when you're doing that process of looking around and seeing what things are problematic and what things you wish you could change. Sorry, I think it's feeding back a little bit when I talk. Like it's really easy to despair or to feel like there's nothing you can do. And even if that's true, I think there's something to be said for attempting to still do something despite that feeling. Ella?
Yeah, you like perfectly segued into exactly what I want to say, so thank you. So I know that majority of the people in here in the audience probably aren't philosophy majors, probably haven't dealt with a lot of issues like that. I understand that we're working with like an ethics and values class, so this might be your first exposure to ethics and to philosophy. So pat yourself on the back for that. Congratulations. We hope you stay. We need you. But I think that moving forward in a practical aspect, I think that it's important to have these sort of discussions because it really opens you up to start to see other people in a new way, right? We go through our lives kind of passively at times, and we kind of pass by and recognize others. We see the news, we watch the headlines, but we're so removed from the actual reality of the situations that are happening. So by having these discussions and really trying to grapple with it and find what we can do on a practical aspect, it allows ourselves to really be more human. So I guess my kind of little call to action for you all would be to really try to get to know your community, wherever you live. Try to get to know your neighbors. Try to see what you can do within your community to really like create some sort of butterfly effect that will eventually have real change.
Good, thanks. Any other questions?
That's a more crazy philosophy question.
Okay. Hi, I just have a question. So, well, obviously that's why I have the mic. Anyway, if you say you could like stop or like improve war and violence, like a lack of it, what do you think is the best way to go about that?
Maybe we'll start with our war and violence group first. Thanks, Emma.
That's a good question. For me personally, I think it's a matter of education, and I also think it's a matter of especially teaching the people closest to you, like what the nearest threat is, and even reaching out to like say police departments or even local governments, trying to find what's like the biggest threat in Utah County. Several years ago, I interviewed one of the Utah County Sheriff's sergeants, and he told me that one of the biggest threats in Utah County was actually sex crimes against children. And he said that they literally need to have a section of the sheriff's office dedicated towards having, just a unit that investigates that solely. But, sometimes there's no resources. So I think it's just important to know what's around you. And I think by knowing what's around you and what other people are going through, you'll be able to find more solutions that way. Like kind of what Nancy Reagan said. I don't like her husband a whole lot, but when she would say, just say no to like drugs or something, that's great advice, right? And I think we can all take something from that. But you have something to add?
I also think it's important that we focus on deconstructing the stigma against victims and not trying to paint a picture of what a victim of violence or war looks like, and accepting that it doesn't matter what you look like or who you are, you can experience violence, and that doesn't make you any lesser or weaker than.
Anyone else want to respond to that? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this is on. Kind of along with what they were saying, but I think it's important to reach out to organizations that are already working on it. So I think that's one of the reasons why we tried to, I guess we didn't really say organizations, but the other groups did a good job about talking about organizations working on the issue. Because I think, yeah, sometimes there is a lack of resources, but I think on our earth, we have a lot of resources. I think the problem is just the amount of people that care. So if you reach out to people that are already caring about the issue, you just get more people caring and you make it more of a bigger issue. And anyone else have anything?
Anyone else?
Do we answer your question thoroughly enough, or is there anything you would like us to touch on a little more? No? Okay, cool.
Did you want? No? Good.
I can tag on real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I will make this so short. Again, like kind of just with everything that's been said, I think that it can be really hard at times to know exactly where to start because it is such a huge issue. But bare bones, like the very first step should always be exposure. Actually trying to take yourself out of that removed position, try to really see what's going on, look into like investigative journalism, look into the people who are on the front lines trying to like show what's going on, talk to people who have actually been through war, talk to your veterans, like talk to different people, see like what can I do for you? And again, like going along with what Ali said, try to find different groups who are already doing that, because the best action is going to be to give those different groups more support so that they have more of that unified front.
Moses, did you have a question? Wait for the mic. Yeah, Moses up there.
In times when we want to make changes, you know, it seems like nowadays there's a lot of people who want to do a level of activism, but only want to do it for, like, I don't know, to seem like they're doing something or to feel good about themselves. They aren't actually interested in making deep change. And like, there's a lot of like slacktivism. Not that I'm blaming people, because I know I've done it as much as anyone. But how do you think we should combat this and try to get some, like, I don't know, deep work and progress done?
You want to respond?
Let someone else go before me.
Okay, Calvin.
Sorry.
I think that's a really great question, and I totally agree that I don't think we should be doing good things to kind of prop ourselves up and make ourselves feel better. I mean, I think everyone should take ethics and values because, I mean, for me, it was such an eye-opener just to see what it would take to be a good leader, be a good, you know, instructor, or just even like a sibling, friend, you name it. If you keep going further into the philosophy department like we have, you'll take a class from Mike Shaw called Ancient Greek Philosophy, and he'll teach us, he will teach you about Plato's Republic. And one thing that Plato calls upon for a perfect republic is to have a philosopher ruler, right? A philosopher ruler is someone who isn't going to, you know, be motivated by their own self-profit or anything like that. It's just for doing what's good, especially, you know, for like the community and not just for, you know, the ruler themselves, right? So, I mean, that's what I think the solution could be. And if anyone else has anything to add on that, that'd be great. But
just to tag team with the other Calvin, this kind of gets into like the classic philosophical dilemma of actions and outcomes versus actions and intentions, right? Like how do we evaluate the ethicality or morality of what someone's doing? Do we do it based on what the results or based on what they were intending? And generally my thought process in regards to this problem is that people's conviction will shine through at the end of the day, right? And so if you're taking actions that are coming from a genuine concern for other people, for the state of the world, that deep-seated conviction is going to be apparent in what you're doing. And so half-hearted efforts that kind of begin from this place of others' perception of you, I think that is somewhat problematic, but I also think it's ineffective, right? Like I think if you actually want to cause real change, then you're going to try to do so. And if you don't actually want to cause real change, you're probably going to fail to do so because it's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to appear a certain way. And so I think most of the time this is a problem that, at least on a personal level, will resolve itself when you're honest and objective about what your intentions are. And it's a problem that disappears when you begin to investigate how deeply people are able to care about these causes. And then, sorry, I don't want to go on too long, but briefly, I want to invoke Malcolm Gladwell. Is by no means a philosopher, but he has a great idea that he talks about strong bonds and weak bonds, right? He talks about social media as a place that very effectively maximizes weak bonds, right? You can raise money really effectively using social media because all of your acquaintances that you barely know are probably willing to give you $1 to help whatever cause you're trying to raise money for. But an acquaintance from social media isn't someone who's going to go to a sit-in with you, right? That's a brother, that's a best friend, that's a sister, whoever it is, right? Like somebody that you know intimately, like, and are very connected with. And those strong bonds are often where, and those are both effective for different things, right? And so it's not to condone using social media as a tool for generating activism or anything like that, but there's different types of tools that can be used.
I can tag on. Okay, one last thing. I'm so sorry, y'all. You're hearing so much from me. But I kind of want to take like a bit of like this kind of consequentialist stance a little bit from an Eastern perspective. So in Confucianism, there's this idea that you do things as if you have these rituals that you're doing as if the spirits were there, you know? I think that any step of activism in the right direction, whether or not it be like a pseudo action or whether or not it be with wrongful intentions, is still in action. And I think that through doing that, kind of like Calvin was tagging on, through doing that, you might honestly find that you'll create a connection with some other person, and you'll kind of have that exposure of really realizing that you yourself exist in a community among tons of other people, and that your efforts not only help that other effort, but help the community as a whole, and by proxy, you. And so I think that even if the intention is not necessarily to actually help other people, that step of activism, whether it be performative or pseudo or not, is still an action that does inevitably help others.
Maybe time for one last question. Do you see a hand?
How much time do we have?
30 seconds.
30 seconds?
For you, yeah.
For me? Okay. Well, I wanted to jump off this last question real quick, too, and just add to kind of what Ella was saying and bringing it back to Sartre. I just read Existentialism as a Humanism, and I think Sartre would agree with kind of this more Eastern philosophy sort of thing as well, where it's maybe not so much about the intention behind doing activism, but the act of doing activism that places the value in activism, so there isn't like a true distinction between the like value in those things. So that's just an interesting tie, but I wanted, what time is it? How much time do we really have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay. I wanted to go to kind of, hold on to the top part. What top part?
Just blocking the signal with your hand.
Oh, only hold it up here. Okay. I know the tricks. So I guess I'm kind of thinking Sartre and Beauvoir, the people you bring up in Prejudice, and thinking of prejudice as this type of othering. And I'm wondering if it's just some sort of essential thing that comes along with being human, which I feel like Sartre and Beauvoir would say in some aspect it is, this othering is going to happen. But I'm kind of wondering like who the responsibility we place on fixing maybe this immoral or unjust sort of othering that happens is on. Especially with Beauvoir and upon reading like The Second Sex, and kind of talking about like how people establish themselves through almost actions and their will. She places like towards the end of the book, it's not like how could men have done this to women, to other them throughout history and completely subjugate them. Men need to like change and be nicer to women. She doesn't really do that. She places like almost all of the responsibility on women, basically having the responsibility to define themselves through their actions and kind of push back on how they have been defined by men as the absolute other. So I'm just wondering how you kind of see this play on like where the responsibility lies. And I think we can agree like both sides probably there should be responsibility, but do you think in like the modern day we are talking enough about kind of the responsibility that maybe the other has in like pushing back through their actions and like self-defining themselves to escape this sort of oppression that they've had, I guess?
That question took all of our time. Great question. Great question. I have to get to another class, though, so I'm going to have to end. So if you want to get the answer, come on up here and listen to these great students. My apologies. But since most of you are from my class, we'll dismiss class this session in the original way. So you can slap your I guess, your leg. So thanks, everyone. And let's give one more round of applause to everyone here. Thank you, everyone. And class dismissed.